as far as I know. It is. It is now 2 o'clock, and we'll call the meeting of the Tax Increment Reinvestment Zone Board of the City of San Angelo, Texas, to order. We do have a quorum. Before we begin, our first item on the agenda is generally for public comment. But before I get that, I'll take a point of privilege I would like to congratulate our new planning director for the City of San Angelo, Aaron Vanoy.
Amen.
Hannah assures me that she's not the assistant planning director yet, but no, I'm just kidding. Congratulations, Aaron. We look forward to working with you and for the good of San Angelo and everything. So I appreciate all you've done during this time in the interim. Public comment, the board will take public comment on all items that are on the regular agenda. If you have an item that is going to be coming up in the agenda, we will take public comment on each of those. So if you have a comment on one of those topics, if you would please wait for that issue to be called up in the at the time when the agenda is called. If you have a public comment or something you would like to say or present to the board that is not on the agenda, this is your time to do that. If you just please approach the microphone and give us your name. Okay. No one's approaching the microphone, so we'll move on. Next item on the agenda is consideration of approving the minutes from the January 23rd, 2024 meeting. Those were included in the packet that was emailed to each of you. Does anyone have any corrections, any questions, corrections, or additions to the minutes of the previous meeting? If not, then I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Second by Mr. Benson. Any discussion or any public comment on the minutes? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. And next item on the agenda is an item that I actually requested to be placed on the agenda. And what I would like to do is just kind of do a little some introductory remarks about why I asked this to be placed on the agenda and what my thoughts were. We've all been going through this situation, particularly with the nonprofits lately, of issues being presented from the TIRZ Board to the City Council and rejected, not just on the nonprofits issue, but on several things related to other projects, the maintenance on Chadburn Street, different things that have been presented that way to the City Council. And I was pondering, trying to think of, this didn't seem to be doing the TIRZ Board any good, and it didn't seem to be doing the city any good. So I was trying to think of a way of maybe we need to rethink what we were doing with nonprofits, with the grants, and I'm particularly talking about in the North Zone. The North Zone is there for a reason, but we have lots of money that accumulates in it over the number of years. I think our balance last I saw was up to close to $2 million. And that's been the way it has been since I came on the TIRZ Board many years ago. So I began to think about other ways, and I know there are other types of projects and things that TIRZ money can be used for, and sometimes has been used for in the city, particularly for public improvement projects. I know a lot of the Chadburn Street improvements all the way through downtown has been part of that. But there's always a hesitancy or concern, particularly on the board, about whether something should be part of the budget that the city pays for as opposed to TIRZ grant funds. And I also kind of realized that our priority, and particularly going back through the incentive policy, preparing for this meeting, is primarily seem to be geared around business development, private property development, and incentives in that regard. But the problem that I've noticed, of course, which has been fine in the South Zone because there's been so much development there and lots of good projects, and we are always spending the money that's dedicated for the South Zone there. We, to my knowledge, have never spent all the money that was available for grants in the North Zone ever. So I began to think about all these issues, public improvement projects, nonprofits, and also the private grants we have. And I began to wonder if we should not reevaluate, at least for the North Zone, what we're using those funds for. Under the law, as I understand it, public improvement projects and other such things are available for the use of those funds, but our focus has been so on private project development, maybe that needed to change. And so I began to think, and I'm just opening this up for discussion, really. I don't have a specific proposal, but I just wanted us to have the discussion about should we be looking and talking about something different to do in the North Zone. One of the things that I had thought was if we could get some historical information about how much money have we been spending, over the last 4 or 5 years in grants on the North Zone, and if we had some kind of percentage of what that was related to the revenue that we take in for the North Zone, could we come up with percentages to say we're going to dedicate for a budget this percent, whatever it is, 20%, 30% for private property grants, and we're going to put 10 or 20 or 30% towards nonprofits, and then also have a process by which the city could apply for public improvement grants up to X amount of dollars, or whatever percentage that might be, through a process that's not from the city council just handing us down something and telling us what to do, but that city staff or departments such as streets or water would actually come in, make an application to the TIRZ Board just like any other applicant, and go through that process. And so I just wanted to bring that up for discussion. That was just my general idea of what I don't see as beneficial to the city is continuing to allow $1 million sitting in the bank when there are so many needs for public improvements, for other developments in the North Zone, particularly on the North Chadbourn corridor and in other places, MLK, things of that nature. So I just wanted to bring this forward for discussion. And as I went back through the incentive policy, it was even more focused on development of private property and businesses than I realized, even including for the North. So to me, the South Zone and the North Zone are two completely different worlds, and that we probably should have at least a discussion on whether we should change what our strategy is and what our incentives should be like for the North TIRZ Zone. So I'm just going to open it up. That was why I asked the issue to be brought forward, and I don't know if you have anything you want to say first, Aaron, in that regard.
I do have a little bit of that background information to just show you some charts and some dollar figures that will help you kind of spur on some of your discussion, I believe. Again, my name is Aaron Vanoy, Planning and Development Services Director. So I did go back and look at some historical stuff. Of course, TIRZ was brought forward in 2006 by City Council and approved, and they approved a 30-year window. And so we have until 2036, December 2036, to utilize those funds unless they decide to stop it sooner for some reason. So we started giving grants away in 2009. Here on the north side, the grants started out very, very, very small. And you can see as you got to 2016, they started to go up. 2016, there was kind of a reorganization, a reshuffle, and kind of brought everything kind of back together. And then we really started hitting the ground in the north area, but it was kind of up and down. And so you can see that we had a peak last year. It was $563,000 that we gave away in 8 grants to private applicants on the North TIRZ. That red line represents what our average that we give away if we were going on a straight line. Now, you can see we've been going up and down, and so that's one of the things that John Mark had mentioned about, well, where are we really at? So I've got...
And let me just ask
Sure.
one question. You indicated that on private grants. Does that include anything on any of the funds that are dedicated from the North Zone for city projects?
It does not. This is only private dollar or private grant dollars that were given out to private property owners. So then I went back and said, okay, well, what's our revenues for that 2017 through this first part of this 2024? So as Chairman mentioned, there's always been kind of this surplus in the actual, and then over here on the right side is what they have projected every year that gets added to it. Well, our highest ever on the north side was last year, that $563,000. You can see we haven't, very few years going back to 2018, we would have just given away what we actually brought in. So we have had that surplus on the north side for some time. The way things have been growing right now, it's very, very positive. But we're only utilizing less than 40% of the TIRZ funds that are in the available category. And we're using, depending on which number you want to use, if we average, say, $400,000 a year, which is close to our average, still we're using about 40% of what's coming over in projected revenue. So we keep stockpiling back, that there's around 60% of funds that are not being requested for. Now, we may have a year that happens, and so I think if we move forward, we may want to be conservative and make sure that we have enough for those private investments. But then if there's that remaining that we say, okay, well, so much maybe go to nonprofits, so much go to public projects and things like that. Yes, Ms. Spears?
Shirley, you have a question?
Okay, so I had asked, I guess a couple of months ago, if we could determine how many nonprofits and so forth are in a certain area, and we weren't able to get that information. So my question, based on what you just said or what I understood, you're saying that we are funding 40% of what's requested, and then you said 60% that's not requested. Is it that it's the 60% that's not requested, or 60% that we're not actually assigning?
So on the north tiers, I didn't look to see how many projects, if we funded 100% of the projects that came to us. Mm-hmm. Of the ones that were recommended for, the ones that were approved at City Council, we've been spending 40% of our available funds.
So can we look at what the TIRZ Board has been recommending versus what the city approves? Do we know what that percentage is?
I would have to do some research, but I could do that, yes, but I'd have to do some research.
Recommend, I mean, I think that on the north zone, I don't recall them not moving forward with what y'all represent.
That's not true.
As far as dollar amounts on, I'm not talking about nonprofits, but on the projects that were approved, they moved forward with the dollar amounts you requested.
Yeah.
Okay, and Mr. Vano, I do want you to finish your report, but that's my point exactly, is that we keep making a distinction between projects that we approved, and then we'll say nonprofits. The point is, according to the policy, nonprofits are eligible, and so if we would just, I think, follow the policy, that maybe would clear up some confusion. So that's my question, is that when we say 60% that's not being used, I'd like to see that breakdown, because I know in the last year we had some requests that this board approved, but it was not approved at council. And so I want to make sure that we're not mixing apples and oranges. Are we saying those that were requested met the criteria by the TIRZ Board, approved by the TIRZ Board, but they're not approved by council? I'd like to see that breakdown.
Okay, I can work on that and get that to the board.
Thank you.
I have another question, and there we go. It goes back to last month when we kind of talked about the sunset date, and if there was what that date is, and if that was 2036,
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
or
ma'am.
if it was sooner than that, like, you know, there were shorter sunset dates on the area, because there, you know, we're really focused on the MLK and Chadron corridors, but I mean, there's Armstrong, and the 19th all the way from west to east turns into Maine,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a huge corridor. And you've got Bell Street, and those are all north side areas that have a lot of traffic that could really benefit from this, and it is on the north side, and they are high traffic areas.
Yeah, and that's, Aaron, and we're going to get to all of those. I mean, we're just starting this topic. This is going to be several
Total
meetings to
brainstorm.
discuss. But go ahead and finish your presentation, and if we can hold our questions until he finishes that, and then we can get into everybody's questions and discussion.
So here's kind of the start of that analysis. So beginning in 2016, we did see a jump in applications, but still it was not to amount that was taking up the amount that we kept bringing back in through the tax evaluation, bringing that dollars in, and we had a surplus. So right now, if you look at that section from 2016 through so far this year, on the north side only, right now we're averaging 6 awards of $335,000 for the total of the 6 awards on the north side. There was that high of $546,000 in 2023. So right now, we've seen that trend pop up. Do we see it come back down? Do we see it plateau? We haven't really seen that. It kind of goes back and forth. It really depends on what the total economy is, because as we know on the north side, each one of those property owners is having to invest 25% of whatever the request is. And so for them to come up with the 25%, sometimes, depending on the economy, that can be a hit for them at times. So if you look over that same time period, our average annual amount for awards on the north is 1.6 million. That would be our average if you looked at those years, with an average of 687 for projected revenue. And I'm going to go back to the last slide for just a second, where you can see where 687 hits between 20 and 21. And so if we're going to continue to see those projected revenues increase. Maybe not largely, although we had roughly a $370,000 increase this last year, we're still going to see some increases through there. And so we know that we're going to be bringing in, say, around $1 million extra every year and putting into that pot. And so to Ms. Spears' point, and to, I think, John Mark's point a little bit, is how do we deal with, do we set a percentage? Say we set aside 60% for private funding. That leaves us 40% for whether it's nonprofits, or is it public works projects, or is it both? Those are the types of questions to have a discussion on. I do think this is our first meeting of these discussions so that we really drill down to what we want. And my role is to really bring you some data so y'all can make decisions, say, here's our recommendation of how we want to deal with these.
Yeah, I don't envision that there's going to be an action taken at this meeting. I mean, I think this is a long discussion that we need to have between staff because, and I'm just going to say this and then turn it over to open the floor, is it's not I just don't think it's a good use of our dollars for the community, for the taxes, for this revenue to be coming in from the tax increments and it not being utilized for the benefit of the citizens. So I think that's the fundamental discussion, and how do we best do that?
Why is our projected revenue so far off?
The actual rolls over whatever was remaining in that account. The projected revenue is just what is projected as tax dollars coming in that year into that account. So you have actuals, and you've spent out of the actuals. This is the revenue that comes in that our finance department, when they work with the appraisal district and everybody, these are the dollars that they say, okay, comes from the North Tiers group and puts into the North Tiers fund. Those are the new dollars coming in.
So the leftover plus the new?
Yes.
It just continues to accumulate is kind of the point.
Yes.
As we're doing right now.
And you're gonna be making $80,000-$90,000 a year in just in interest alone.
There is always interest dollars coming back, yes.
You have more to your presentation, Aaron? Or?
No, I really stopped there because I thought, well, I could really get into the bunny trails myself, and I
Okay.
thought, well, that's really to let you guys open up your minds and discuss of what's really the best way to move forward. The one thing that I didn't really point out, but I do want to mention is number 4, I do think that our marketing is picking up, and I think that's why we saw an increase this last year. And so I always want to keep that in the back of our mind, because say if we do cap our public or our private grants at 60%, there may be a year that we have enough requests that it goes over that. So I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind.
And the floor is open for the board for anyone to ask any questions or comments about it. So.
I can make a comment that we have been for almost a year and a half now in pretty good interest dividends on our investments. I would like the staff to consider for nonprofits that we set aside the interest dividend from the previous year to be reserved for nonprofits, non-public profits. I'm talking about the city of San Angelo. I'm talking about like a church or something like that. Am I on? I'm not talking. I would like to see the interest dividends of each, from each for the south and the north, set aside as a separate pot of money, period. Nobody can touch it but nonprofits. And I don't mean the city of San Angelo nonprofit. I mean legitimate nonprofit people.
I should be able to get you the numbers, especially over the
Because
last
right
5
now, in the north zone, the current policy, I just saw that, nonprofits are forbidden in the south zone. And that's total bull. If we're gonna allow it in the north, why not in the south? I mean, you can't play, that's just wrong.
I can certainly bring some numbers back so y'all can see what those projections could be.
If the north this year, based on $2 million in the fund, I bet there's gonna be at least $85,000, $90,000 interest earned.
Shirley, you have your green light on, so.
Okay.
Does that mean you're going to say something?
I do have a
Okay,
couple
all right.
questions. Okay, so, a few years ago, I was told, and I don't know if you can confirm this or not, Mr. Benoit, but that there had been a loan from the north to the south TIRZ budget. Or do you have any information, number one, on that?
I'm not aware of that,
Anybody
but
on
I
the
know there was
board?
discussion about combining the groups at one point, but.
I think what you may be referring to is there were some funds, I believe, used from the north to go on the Chadburn Street Improvement Project in the downtown in the south area.
Was that any amount that was to be paid back, or was it just?
No, I think it was
Okay.
just the city council appropriated it to use it for that purpose.
Okay.
And that's a multi-year deal.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Okay.
And I
So
might
are they
wanna-
continuing, is money still continuing to come from the north?
Yes, there's a percentage each year.
The north is paying for the downtown landscape improvements, streets, and all that stuff, a
Okay.
lot of it.
Do we-
South paying for most of it, but they're taking money from the north every year and applying it against the debt.
And I apologize if I've overlooked it in previous financial reports, but do we know what that is on a yearly basis? Or how
I
much
can
the
get that
north
number.
is?
I don't have that number in front of me, but I can get you that number.
Okay,
It's a percentage of what we get in each year.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
It's
what
a
our
percentage?
allocated fund is,
It's
it's a
percentage.
percentage of the north and the south.
right.
okay. All right,
It's
so,
somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000, if I remember correctly.
okay, I'm more interested, I think, in the percentage of what that is, because in listening to what you're saying we're generating, and when I anticipate what's on the north side and what's on the south side, when we talk about, to your point, about whether or not we need to open it up on both sides for nonprofit, then that makes a difference when I look at some of the nonprofits, Stephen, that are in the South. That's a pretty big footprint. And so I really would be interested in knowing what that percentage is. And then the second part of my question is, do you think we'll ever be able to determine how much we've given to any nonprofits on the north side? Do you think we can just ever capture that?
I don't think we ever have.
As far
No,
as,
he told me that we haven't, so that's why I'm asking, is there a different mechanism in place?
as far as
if we
TIRZ
ever get-
funding, I could not, through our list as I was going through, I did not find a single nonprofit on the north side that had received funds.
Okay, so,
Wait a minute,
Now, I could-
the city
Well, the
has
city.
received north funds, and they're a nonprofit.
Okay.
okay. So I would like to know if we haven't already, if we could put a mechanism in place, because this is really something that bothers me, and I know the community is bothered by it. If we're going to say that nonprofits are included, then I would like to know that percentage.
Okay.
And I'd like for a mechanism to be put in place from this point forward, should we ever get past the council, on any of our recommendations, so that we can track. And if we ever, this is a three-part thing, Aaron.
Yes, ma'am.
So, and if we ever were to change the rules, or the policy, I should say, on providing funds for north and south nonprofits, then I would like for that to be separated by north and south if it is a nonprofit, if we ever fund that. Because at some point, we either need to change this policy, and I know I'm going down that little pathway, John, but we either need to change the policy and say that their nonprofits are not going to be allowed, or we need to make sure that if I put this project criteria on a checklist, and if this body has checked off everything and that organization meets all the criteria, then it's senseless, quite frankly, when they meet the criteria, but then when we get it to the city, it doesn't get approved. So we either need to change the criteria, therefore we can change the check boxes, right? Or it doesn't make sense. We're just going around and around in circles.
Yes, ma'am.
I agree. Changing the city council than doing that.
Well, we're not going to comment on that, but.
I have one thing that I would just like to get some clarification on. Going back to that sunset date, is it the 2036? And is there any option to expand those corridors? And if there's not an option, is there a way to make it an option? Because I think if we have an abundance of it and we're trying to reach people, we've got plenty of opportunity out there if we take it past two roads of the north side.
And I do think I've got some of the answer to that. So currently, right now, it is the 2036. It would take council action to change that. If there's funds in the TIRZ district currently, it would not transfer over to another district. It would either have to go back to those properties that had created that. It wouldn't, I don't think it would transfer to another district. So they would be like starting a brand.
Just on those areas?
Yes, ma'am,
Okay.
just
I don't
within that
think-
district.
Legal would have to speak to it, but I don't think that you can adjust the boundaries of the TIRZ zone or spend outside of the TIRZ zone. So like going to Bell Street, if it's not in the TIRZ, not an option, without creating a new TIRZ zone.
So because only those areas really are being taxed on that, therefore they are receiving.
Right, those,
Okay. That was my
right,
question.
and that's where the payoff difference comes with council, so those taxes basically are frozen at whatever level.
Okay.
And the excess comes in. The city, of course, gets more sales tax if the, activity goes up there, but they're not getting the added, money
just-
into the general fund
Yeah.
that's going into this.
And just one minor note, it's a minor thing, but some people will take it and run the wrong way with it, is there's no additional tax that's tiers. It's an increment out of the increase in the
Correct.
revenue that's coming. So
Correct.
we're not taxing anybody. It's just a dedicated part of the tax revenue that's already coming, that comes to this.
And if
village.
we were,
It focuses on the taxes.
But it's in that area, yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
if we were to change the geographic makeup, would that not have to go back to the state? That's what I've been told over the state would have to weigh in if we're trying to change the geographic makeup of either north or south.
I may be wrong, but I don't think you can without making a totally new district. I don't think you can just expand an existing one.
Yeah, I don't, once it's enacted, I think
it's
the law is that you can't change it. You can create another one.
Okay,
Or you can mesh them together, but you can't expand them.
Yeah.
okay.
Ma'am,
So what happens with the money in 2036? If there's money left, or is there a plan, or should there be a plan, that since 2036 is the end of this tenure, do we start looking at things in 2030, 32, or whatever, so that we don't have this excess money? Or what happens to whatever funds are available in 2036 when this period has expired? What happens to that money?
That's a great question. I'm researching that and working with our finance team and legal to get the right answer on that. So I don't want to mislead what
Okay.
I think the answer is. But I do echo your response of, should we start looking at that date? Yes, we're right in the middle of our 30-year window, but every year that ticks by and that fund, if it continues to increase, there may be
Well, and that's-
excessive dollars that we need to do something with.
And that's sort of part of the reason for this discussion. Stephen, you had something you wanted to
Yes.
say?
Just my point of clarification. Shirley, you mentioned a while ago that there's a large number of nonprofits in the South Zone. And that's why I came up with a proposal or suggestion that we use the interest earned from the fund for nonprofits. Because there's not much money in the South that you can make money on. It can be just a small pot, maybe for a few $1,000s. Where in the north, there's gonna be $80,000, $90,000 each year generated from interest or dividends. And that was the reason for that. It will limit the, because there are a large number of nonprofits, it'll limit the amount of money we can give. That's why I said that.
Everything you want to say?
The other thing is, I don't like the idea of not allowing nonprofits in the South Zone. That's discriminatory.
Is there any comments from this side of the table?
I want to ask about the dividends. Are you saying the dividend only on the interest that's earned every year? That's all we could use, like, because I'm thinking of it as part
I'm
of this
saying
bigger
in the
discussion.
South, in the North Zone and in the South, that the interest earned can only be used for nonprofits.
Plus whatever we may designate out of these percentages coming. That's what I wanted
Yeah.
to make sure I was
If
hearing
you
you
generate
correctly.
$100,000 in the north in dividend interest of the previous year, that stays in that pot.
And so currently, those get rolled into the fund, they get added back to this actual number.
2.3.
They can be assigned to projects at that time as interest dollars. As I take what Mr. Brown is saying, is that those would be kind of set aside specifically for nonprofit projects that they could apply, y'all could award out of that pot of money.
Brian, you need to hit your button.
Did we not ask for guidance from city council last week about what they want us doing to go forward with nonprofits?
We didn't ask for guidance from, well, we basically said we weren't going to take any action the last, several meetings ago after we weren't going to take any action. They asked us to consider making a change. We did not make any change. This has come up just because I was just trying to think of a way to be proactive, to get this thing off a high center and move us forward. But I think nonprofits, the nonprofit issue, while not the sole reason, I think it is part of the reason why I think we need to have this discussion, because if we have a bigger discussion about this fund and what we're going to do with it between now and 2036 and what happens to it after 2036 is an important issue that we need to take up, and so we can be planning ahead for it. And so the city council at that time will have to plan ahead of what are they going to do. Are we going to end this one and move on to another area of the town that needs a TIRZ development? You know, there's all sorts of questions that go with that. But I think if we could address the best way to utilize the funds that have accumulated in there between now and that time would be helpful. So I'm sorry, Brian, you have another.
No, I just, there's not been a nonprofit, obviously they're not eligible in the south, so even the north, there's not been a nonprofit other than the city that's been approved through us and city council. I know we've approved some, but the city council has turned them down.
Other than city-related projects?
Other than city-related projects.
I am not aware of one. I'm still looking through all the data, but as I was doing all this data, I did not find one. They were all businesses and private property businesses, not nonprofits. I will look again just to be sure, but I don't recall anything I don't recall anything that was a nonprofit or even close to a nonprofit at that time.
That's what I was.
And since we're just discussing, I think that when we look at, to your point, Stephen, about a lot of nonprofits are on the south, and if we try to level that out and make it a little more equitable between both sides, I think we would see a tremendous difference when we look at the footprint of nonprofit churches in the south, and then look at the nonprofits within the boundaries of churches on the north. And I think if we made that type of adjustment, we would see some difference at our council in terms of approval. Because it seems like within the nonprofit discussion, we have split hairs again and said that nonprofit and then churches. So if the church is in fact nonprofit, then it shouldn't matter whether they're a church or they are a health foundation or they are a whatever. If they meet the criteria and they just happen to be nonprofit, then it shouldn't matter. But it seems like here of late, we being the city, we have made a decision that if they are a church, then they have to meet some other criteria, which is not documented anywhere. The criteria here says on the north, right, that they can be nonprofit, and it lists the criteria. And to my knowledge, and someone can correct me because I haven't been on this board very long, but if they meet the criteria and they just happen to be a church, then we are not delivering what we promised our constituents and our citizens that we're going to do based on this committee, because we're saying, okay, well, we'll approve it at this body, but then it's not going to get approved over here because it's a church. So I think that's worth discussing, as well as what type of nonprofits, or if we're going to exclude certain types of nonprofits or whatever, because as the policy is written, we are excluding churches even though they meet all the other criteria. And that's something that we need to stop doing.
Mr. Holmes?
So, and I'm curious, Shirley, as you're talking, I'm wondering, and granted, I'm newer too, so aside from the city being a nonprofit, are there any nonprofits that have applied for grants besides churches so far?
That's a great question. Hannah and I will have to do some
I think
research on that.
Mr. Boone is raising his hand because I think his nonprofit, come on, if you come up to the board, they did apply, but I don't think it went anywhere, but.
Simply, we are an organization, not a church.
And tell us what the name of the organization is.
It's called Bridge Connection.
And you all made an application to
Several.
the,
Yes,
okay, and it was approved at this body,
yes,
Okay,
but denied at city?
yes.
Okay.
okay.
Have you made a new application?
No,
Or you want to make a new application?
yes.
Good.
Well, thank you, Mr. Boone.
Yeah,
Before,
I don't think there's, I mean, I think most of them have been churches or this, so I don't think there's any extra nonprofit negligence that the city's shown to churches that they have anybody else. It's been no nonprofits,
Yeah.
basically, other
It's
than
just-
their own entity.
Yeah.
well,
It just happens, it's been churches
That-
mostly
that's
that have
mainly
applied, is
applied,
what you're
yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
I'd like to, I think we've had a fair discussion on the nonprofits issue, and I kind of get a sense that there's a general consensus that what we're doing with nonprofits is not proper or right. But I would like to have some discussion on the other aspect of it. What is your feeling about if we were to change our policies and strategies to have some sort of process where public improvement projects could be funded out of this through some sort of process that the city could apply for on a regular basis?
Well, the city did apply for the one that they had, they did apply for it, and they did came up here and present their case. We turned it down, and then at city council,
Well, that's the one that we asked, that just most recently you're talking about?
well, the one with the public parks improvement with the truck and the
Yeah,
percentage
we reject.
out of that salaries and all that.
Yeah,
Now, they did make their case here and did present that to
What
us.
I recall from that, I do not recall that as being an application that the city actually applied for, that there was a grant available or money available. What I recall that being is, this is something the city council has decided to do. Mr. James, present this to the TIRZ, from the city council, telling the TIRZ board, we want you to do this, we want you to approve it. And then we say we don't like that idea, and then they overrule it anyway. What I'm talking about is a process whereby if the streets department wants to pave a street, and and part of that is in the TIRZ zone, would we be open to a process where the streets department submits a written application, just like a private property owner would, saying,
That would create a level playing field for all parties. And if we did
Well,
it with the checklist and also the percentages, and everybody could apply for it, then we'd be able to designate or differentiate equitably between nonprofits and the city and
well,
private entities.
and I think it would have to be, it would have to be limited to public improvement projects that are, one, obviously in the north tier zone, or I guess you do the same thing for the south if you wanted, which is, that are public improvements that's gonna help the general appearance of that area, that will help promote private investment in the buildings in those areas, and applying for grants, for private property grants, to just basically help those areas revitalize and look better.
If you
My
say
only concern
public-
is
if
having
you say
some sort of
public-
hierarchy there. I feel like that.
I think if you present a process for them to do it, we're opening up our doors where that's where most of the money's gonna go.
Absolutely. And I feel like if we have those, the different options, I feel like if we are going to open the door to that, we need to have somewhat of a hierarchy according to, you know, our first responsibility maybe is to businesses or whatever. And then priorities, yes, and then maybe to nonprofits that are not city. And that, you know, so that there is something that is a little bit more of an even playing
Well-
field.
well, you can-
When you open it up to city, I kind of agree with you. I feel like it's going to go back to the city, and even if we turn it down,
Well,
they're going to
Our
approve it.
hierarchy
It's already-
will go to city council.
I'll give you a different point of view on that. I believe it's already there. City council knows that there's $2.3 million sitting in the tiers. When they're looking for projects, they're saying, well, maybe we could use some of those tiers funds for that. And then it's being kind of handed down from on high from the city council, here, TIRZ Board, approve this project that the city wants to do.
But right now, we don't have a process for that to happen. I think if we have one, it's gonna make it easier for them.
But then wouldn't we just set aside, I mean, limit the amount they could get each year?
No, because you can tell them no, and they're gonna do whatever they want to. If you have a process for it, they're gonna take advantage of it. If we don't have a process for it,
Well, and
I think it's
hypothetic-
harder for them to get it through.
Hypothetically, if, you know, for instance, they deny, you know, XYZ church, and they're like, oh, well, that's $75,000 we could use, let's deny it, and then we could use it too. I mean, you kind of start monopolizing the capital that's there.
Well, and that's what I want to know. I mean, is there any interest in that? Because if there's not any interest from this board in opening that up for public improvement projects, then we need to know that.
Well, other nonprofits can't do public improvement? I mean, what do we
I'm
define?
I'm
as-
talking about like city-owned property.
I understand, but what do we define? Because when we use the term public improvement throughout the process, unless we make a distinction, it's the same definition. So what do we consider as public improvement?
I think it'd be like streetscape projects, similar to what you see on the north side. If you're talking about north side, that on Chadburn right now, that there's a potential to extend that. It could be sidewalks, where we've done some grants to private property owners, and we've kind of made the requirement of, hey, you need to improve the
And
sidewalk
it
here.
still falls
in
under
the-
public improvement?
That's a good question.
Okay, so-
I'll research that, but I would say it's anything that's in that right of way that the city, and I'm going to say the word owns, it's not technically the term.
It's
but
going
they-
to benefit that neighborhood and community. And I'll give you an example. You're going to hear one coming to y'all before too long, before this group had mentioned to staff about the idea of liking to leverage their funds against grant dollars that might be coming in. Patrick's going to be coming to y'all with an example of one he has to finish this north streetscape. And leveraging that with massive grant dollars versus the input. So I think those are the things y'all instructed staff in the past that you liked. And so you're going to see those coming to you, not trying to take advantage of the TIRZ group. It's just an example of one.
And I hear what you're saying, and that's been part of my concern. It's always the concern of does all that fund just get rated? And I think that's where if you set up a policy, an incentive policy, and you actually designated percentages or a maximum amounts or percentage or whatever you wanted it to be, you would not want to have available funds from the tiers above a certain percentage or a certain dollar amount for public improvement projects. Because we want to reserve those funds for the 50 or 60% that we want to spend it on private development, private improvement projects. And you would want to spend a certain percentage, have reserved, whether it's through the interest payments, the dividends, or from some other mechanism for nonprofits, and also then whatever that is. I'm just talking about having the discussion about what it would look like. I think you might actually reduce the issues, and I think that's been my issue is I understand the city wants, it's money available, so why not use it and come after it? I think what our job is to try to protect that for the benefit of everybody, and making sure that this is something extraordinary that's not part of the city's responsibility in its budget. that it should be taken care of through the budget. I think that was one of our issues with some of the streetscape maintenance issues, was that looked more like a budgetary item than a special expenditure to benefit the area, so.
Well, right now, I guess I would have to agree that we don't need to set a policy, because then I think it would just really create a problem. So I'm in agreement with you. But at the same time, it's like, right now, there are a lot of vacant properties on the north, as opposed to looking at how many properties are owned individually on the south, right? And who's to say we have until 2036? A lot of things can happen in terms of development, whether you're looking at private or public or whatever. Because I remember just 2 years ago, Mr. Van Noy, and I know that you remember, Rick, when we said that there was an issue on the north side with people just not understanding what their options were in terms of applying. And once we went through even a simple process, because I wanted more, but it was a simple process, where we provided some instruction, we had town hall meetings, et cetera. So we saw an increase that you mentioned, Mr. Van Noy, of projects coming from the north. We have to also consider that there are certain things that we just should not automatically allow the tax dollars to just take care of. There is a large company that has a huge footprint that is nonprofit in downtown. So we want to be very careful.
Not anymore. Shannon's not tax exempt anymore.
We want to be very careful of how we apply our definitions and what we do, because of what you just mentioned, Stephen. I hadn't finished. But we want to make sure that we are careful in looking at our small to medium-sized mom and pop type operations. I think it is careless on our part if we give funds to an organization that has been around forever, that has funds, that's solid financially and all of that. I think like anything else that we do in this country, we really need to look at making sure that we're supporting the opportunity for small and medium-sized businesses to just get ahead, and sometimes putting a fresh coat of paint and some bushes out front makes a difference in their overall income. And that's what I hope we don't lose sight of. And then I want to make sure that if there's anything that we can do, because I think it takes a majority of city council to overrule what we recommend to them, I'd like for us to consider, I realize they're the city council, but what is the point of this board if we're going to go through the process and then they still can overrule when all the check boxes have been checked? So.
I think because we're an advisory board, unfortunately, that's just the nature. I feel like we're circling around to the very beginning of this conversation where we're still saying, hey, we've got these nonprofits, and hypothetically the reason that they're not qualifying on the city council side is because, they have other means to get the money. They have membership. They are there to serve the communities, therefore receiving the money. And then you have the city who is in the same boat. So you have one group that's receiving it and one that's not. So I think that circling it back around to the very beginning of why we're even having this conversation, we really have got to address that.
Well,
and what we're going to be willing to do, what we're not going to be willing to do. And unfortunately, that's not our decision at the end of the day. I mean, we make the the recommendation, but at the end of the day, it's not our decision to make.
anything we recommend would have to be approved by city council. And we need to move on to the next item on the agenda, but just so we can kind of have, I don't want to just leave this languishing. I do get some sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the board is interested in visiting about the nonprofit issue. But I don't get any sense of anyone's interested in changing any policies as far as public improvement projects, anything of that nature. Is that fair?
As long as you're saying public improvement, yes. But I think we are interested, or I am interested, in looking at the policy, and we may need to modify the policy in order to be more accommodating to our business community.
Well, go ahead, Stephen.
John Mark, you know as well as anybody that the planning commission, when they make a decision on zoning, it takes a supermajority of the city council to override.
Yep.
And I think the same policy ought to be applied or be presented to city council for them to vote it up or down. That when we make a recommendation, to override our recommendation takes a supermajority.
Well, to answer that question, I believe it's by statute that the city council has the ultimate authority. I don't know that we could change that, but legal could probably answer that question for us.
You might look at
next
that.
time.
We can look at that. I know for the planning commission, it is by statute that it has to be the
think-
majority vote, or the supermajority.
Unless anyone disagrees, I think what we want to do, Aaron, is, and if I'm stating the direction that the board wants to go, let me know. But I think we would like to have a discussion on the nonprofit policy, changing that going forward. And I guess just Shirley indicated a desire to make sure our policies are directed towards small business in that regard, and there's not anything there. The public improvements issue will not take up, at least not for now, and then we'll just kind of see how things go. I think that is an important issue that we do need to wrap up, and I don't think we're going to make much progress on anything else without that issue being resolved.
Does that include setting aside, percentages to go to each category as part of that discussion?
I think it can be. I just think the only thing I hear consensus from everybody in having an interest in changing is how we deal with nonprofits, whether the funds come from interest or whether we get an understanding about what nonprofits can apply and what they're eligible for, and that the rules, basically that the city goes along with follows those recommendations when we make them. On to the next item, item number 5, TIRZ Marketing and Promotional Strategy. Monica, you're going to present that for us. And just for the new members on the board, if you wouldn't just, or maybe if Aaron can, just kind of tell us the history of how downtown San Angelo became involved in the TIRZ and the marketing of it, so we can just kind of have that
absolutely.
history.
So Monica Ramos, I'm not assistant anymore, Executive Director of Downtown San Angelo. Del retired in December. So this is my new role, taking over this position. Downtown San Angelo is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We started back in 2005, and we were also a part of the Main Street program in 2005 around this time as well, and we still are. We are proud to say that we have 15 years of accreditation with this program. And what this means is that we're a part of a group of other Main Street cities that get together and share resources and information with each other. The purpose of the Main Street program is to help us revitalize our local economy and help us transform our community as well. With the accreditation, we do submit reports each year to Main Street to receive this recognition. And what this shows is that we are doing our part in keeping our downtown alive and thriving. We work off of a Main Street 4-point approach: design, organization, promotion, and economic vitality. So a few brief examples would be design, the historic gateway, and street lighting that downtown placed next to the YMCA and First Financial Bank. This is wayfinding into downtown. It helps enhance our downtown neighborhood. Organization is all of our many partnerships with different organizations in San Angelo that help us with planning and help us with events. Our promotion is our historic downtown magazine. An example is our website, where we share information about events and activities that are happening in downtown. And then, of course, economic vitality, going back to our ways of helping small businesses, entrepreneurs, developers that approach us and ask about availabilities for properties that are for sale or for lease in downtown. We can provide guidance and direction to them and help connect them to who they need to speak with. In 2006, when the TIRZ program was established, downtown San Angelo played a part in helping initiate the TIRZ program, and we helped fund the program. So this is what connects us way back to its beginning, to its inception. And last year, we were appointed by the city to be the location to receive applications from the north and the south. This was a way for us to help the city planning department kind of add this extra step, or not exactly extra step, but an extra way to give them more time to focus on reviewing applications. Our part is only receiving applications. We'll make sure that property owners that submit their paperwork have everything that they need, and then we submit it over to the city planning, and then they take on the review process and the next steps for TIRZ. Hannah and I met recently, and we brainstormed a couple of ideas that will make this marketing most impactful to people not only in the South, but definitely in the North. This was a big topic that I've heard in the past meetings, that the North really isn't receiving this information. Maybe they're too timid to come forward and approach us. They're not aware of the impact that the TIRZ program can make on their properties and in that North Side area. So starting with visual content. Visual content is normally the most engaging and interesting to people. So yard signage is at the top of this list. If we can get a yard sign out front in every TIRZ project as they're going through construction, this is something that's visible to people as they drive by, as they walk by. It raises the question, if they didn't already know about it, what is TIRZ? Who can I call for more information about it? The graphic shown here has a front and back of what a yard sign would look like to be placed out front of a property, and it shows contact information, what it's about briefly, and the zone. So you can also look and see if you're a property owner within that zone. QR codes might be handy on small business-sized cards. The board can hold them. We can hand them out to anyone else that would be beneficial to, if we're at meetings or attending functions, we can simply hand out these cards and say, here, you might be interested, you might be a property owner in this zone, here's some information, scan this QR code. QR codes are the new day and age. This is what people are using now to link to online methods, and so this would be extremely beneficial. DSA and city website. We noticed that downtown San Angelo briefly, and I wouldn't even say briefly, just lightly mentions the TIRZ program, but it doesn't mention that we are now accepting applications. So this would be something that we'll update to our website. The city's website needs some updating as well. It still shows Del Velasquez. It doesn't state again that we are accepting the applications. It would be good to have our office location at 24 West Concho Avenue. Social media. This is a great way for us to get feedback and gather insights. Right now, this is what everyone's using as well. They pass through either on Facebook or Instagram, and it is for the younger generations to use this social media platform. And we can use assistance from the news outlets to share this information as well, through print or through social media, maybe getting on air for some interviews to talk about the TIRZ program. Testimonials would be very important because we can talk to individuals that have utilized the TIRZ grant program, and they can share their experiences with TIRZ and the application process and how it has positively impacted their property. Before and after photography, kind of the same with testimonials. Show a photo of, for example, Old Central Firehouse before TIRZ and after TIRZ. Show what it can do to the exterior of your building or property. And then finally, distribution. This was something that was thought of because giving the information to people, we want to give it to not just really anyone, giving it to realtors, bankers, people that have that first-hand touch with property owners that are maybe looking to sell after 2 years, of course, or maybe it's someone that's looking to buy property in the north or south zone within the TIRZ boundaries. This information can be provided to them right off the bat by a realtor or a banker. So distributing that information to the right market to get the word out is very beneficial. And then application, question, and answer sessions. Perhaps that's something that downtown San Angelo and the city does on a quarterly or biannual basis, to where we open up the floor for any questions about the application process. I think that people get afraid of the application. It's pretty easy. You can get your funding as long as you meet each set of criteria, but filling out the paperwork can be kind of scary. So having this question and answer session can really help us be able to help applicants get through the application process, ask any questions that they want to, and help them feel more comfortable. So I hope that this really helps us. This is just an idea here. We really think this is really going to work, but this should help us educate and inform people about the positive impact of the TIRZ program. Do y'all have any questions?
Are there
or
any
input?
questions from the board?
Yes, I have some questions.
I might be,
But Shirley had the first question.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so what will the economic impact be? I guess the question should be asked this way. If an organization or a business gets funding, are we able to track the economic impact to report that as one of the stats, like we can get stats from social media? Will we be looking at tracking any stats on how the assistance from TIRZ help to impact the economics of a company or an organization?
You know, that would be, I don't know if that would be a more factual process, because that would be getting information from the property owners of their revenue and how it is impacting that. So that's a
Can we
good
get some type of
thought, but we might have to
feedback?
think through that and see what that exact process would be to get that information, gather the
We
information. and
we might could
And
talk, we
organize
might could
it.
talk to the chamber about that, too.
Okay, and then on the social media, which outlet, which platform are you talking about in particular? Is it just Facebook, or you talking about?
Facebook, Instagram. I know anytime that Downtown San Angelo shares any important information, we add the city of San Angelo as a co-host, Discover San Angelo. Those are all the top news outlets. I mentioned like news interviews and news stories. I know there's some other online media sources that have a huge following. We can meet with them and see about getting information shared to their platforms as well.
Okay, and then two last points. Can we look at, I don't know what the budget is, right, for the marketing, but can we look at relationships with some of our businesses for billboard marketing? And then also, is it possible for us to look at messaging in our water bills, so that even if you don't know that an organization is planning to start a company or what have you, everybody gets a water bill? And so could we look at maybe getting messaging on water bills and looking at trying to get those reduced rates, which I know exist because I just went through it myself, on some of our billboards, our digital billboards?
I'm glad you brought that up, because yes, and with the yard signage, that's what I was thinking of, was looking into getting a sponsor for that signage. I know that it's been about 6 to 10 approved applications per year, and overall I think it's about 108.
Okay.
So looking into a sponsor, yes, would be something that we would really look into. As for the water bill, we can talk about that, maybe see what that looks like. I don't know if people really read their water bill.
Well,
So
it
just
depends on
something
the
to think
placement of the
about.
message,
I don't.
yeah.
So that's a good thought to get us going. What other method like that in print can we add this to that people will pay attention to? So I like that.
Okay, thank you.
Trey and then Stephen.
okay, so my question would be on this, Monica. Number one, and I'm in full support of this. I think it looks great, but where do the funds come to pay for this? I know we just mentioned the sponsorship, so I might be piggybacking on that, but without that, is that something we would provide? And then, I guess, is there a start date that you'd like to do this? Because I know we've got an open window. What starts next month? March?
Friday, yes, Friday of this.
Yeah, Friday.
March
I was gonna
1st,
say,
March
it's right
1st
around
to
the
April
corner.
30th.
Yeah, it starts. And then, so those two questions, and then I do want to ask one thing. You mentioned this. Did you say that you guys help with 108 applications a year, but only 6 to 8 are approved? Did
No.
I mishear that?
Yes, or
Okay.
maybe I misspoke. 108 since the tiers started.
Okay. I
And then it's 6
misheard
to
you.
10
You-
on average per year.
Yeah, you did not misspeak. I just misheard you over here.
And so as far as the funding, we haven't really gotten into that part yet to see how much this would cost. That's something that we'll go through next and look at the pricing, what this would look like. So then that way we can see how we can divide up this cost, whether it's, partially downtown, a request to the city. If TIRZ is willing to help with that as well, that's perfect. But we'll come back and give you an update on what that looks like. This is just an initial, here's what we think would really help, and if y'all agree, then we can move forward and find more detailed information as far as the numbers and who we could approach for funding.
Stephen, you have something?
This may be a question more for Aaron. I'd just like to know the amount of the contract that's paid from TIRZ Fund to downtown San Angelo for this service.
That's a good question. I don't have that information. I
If
know
you could
that-
provide it at the
but
next meeting, that'd be great.
I will work on that.
I
yes.
appreciate it.
Yes.
Any other questions from the board? And I mistakenly did not ask for public comment on the last topic, and so I'll ask, is there any public comment on either of these topics from anyone who wants to address the board today? We're not taking any action on any item today. It's mostly just discussion and information. All right.
Actually, I
Yeah.
just had a thought.
Can you come up to the microphone?
Sure. I've been listening to a couple of the meetings through YouTube.
Okay, well, wait till you get to the microphone.
Right.
Can you say your name, please?
Sarah Ford. I've been
Okay.
listening to a couple meetings, and so I appreciate what y'all do and the efforts. And since the frustration with things getting kicked back from city council, one thing that occurs to me, though, with using interest is that the point is not to have a big pot of money to begin with. So as a citizen, just getting that out, that money out of the account would be my priority. And I do think it's a slippery slope if it opens up to the city. But I do like the idea of it improving the streets, like the public places, just to encourage development.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Miss, very much. Is there anyone else wants to speak? All right, Aaron, you're up again with the director's report.
Well, thank you, Chairman. The only real item I have is, as Mr. Holmes mentioned, our TIRZ South application window opens March the 1st and will close at the end of April, which is April 30th. We're giving 2 months for applications to come in. I know that we've been receiving phone calls. Monica's been receiving phone calls and been working with folks. So we hope to have a good group of people applying. As always, for those that are out listening or watching, the North Tiers takes applications all the time. There's not a window, so if you're interested, please visit with downtown San Angelo or come into the planning department with the city, and we're happy to sit down and visit with you and see what we can do to get applying for some Tiers funding.
All right. The
Did the council approve all the last board meetings recommendations?
They approved 5 out of 6, and they tabled 1, which was 36 East Tuig, the cactus. They had some questions, and there was some public comment, but we are bringing that back to council on March 5th for the request of funding, and we have answers for the city council. And really, Mr. Brown, I felt like I kind of failed the applicant and the board a little bit. I wasn't prepared for some of those questions, but I feel very confident that I'm going to be ready to answer those questions this time.
Excuse me, I didn't hear, which one they tabled? I'm sorry, I didn't hear
The
that.
the cactus.
Okay.
Okay. The next is just for announcements and possible future agenda items. I think we want to bring back to have at least continue the discussion on nonprofits and revision to the incentive policies in that regard. And then I think the only other thing I can think of that I had asked about was just training for new board members and old board members too, whatever that looks like. So do we does it look like we're going to have incentive packages to come up for the meeting in March?
I know that we will have a meeting in March. We feel very confident in that. I've been talking with Patrick Farrick, our Director of Public Works, who he does want to come and present to the board a project. And he's projecting then because I think he has a timeline on some stuff. But I think he's going to bring some information to you so you can start digesting that, even if a decision isn't made in March, but at least digesting it. I may not be here in March. I think I have a meeting in Austin that I'm supposed to be at, but we will still have a meeting. We're still going to have some discussion items that we'll move through and have some more updates. We will have a financial update in March as well.
Okay.
John,
Yes, ma'am.
I know that you had several action items that you took down today. So are we to expect those in March or at a later time?
I will have answers on the ones that you brought to me. I will have it to where y'all will be able to have some discussion, and I'll be monitoring from afar. But those that are in the that are here, they'll be able to take notes as well, and we'll be able to keep moving the discussion forward.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. There's no other future agenda items requested. Is there a motion to adjourn? So moved, seconded by Mr. Holmes. All those in favor say yes. Yes. Any opposed? You get to stay here by yourself.